Penn State football is in the second half of the spring football window. And I use the word window because we're talking about windows today. There are only a couple more opportunities for the team to get better and to improve as a full group in the spring portal. In the team setting, Nate Bauer, I know it's the internet. It's the age of parsing every single word you say apart to find the incorrect thing. I get it. But my point is, the team's going to be together for only a couple more times to practice together in a full unit before they have to go and work an individual over the summer. And during that time, the spring portal window is also open. We're going to be talking about that dynamic today on the show and just generally previewing the second half of everything leading into the blue-white game on April 26th. Okay, Nate, welcome to the show. As our ombudsman, what did I get wrong in that opening stanza?
They'll improve as a full team many times between now and the start of preseason camp. Sure,
absolutely. Fitz, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm great. I can't top that. So, yeah, it's a process. You know, we can't forget the process, and that's it's very funny because you mentioned being on the internet, and you think about the lasting impressions that guys make. And then that's what they are for the rest of their career in some people's minds. Like, then it's crazy. Players get better. Like, and it happens all the time. And we just kind of latch on to Mike Gesicki can't catch the ball. To, you know, I think there's people that still believe that he's got issues with that. It was more of a blocking thing. But anyway, you look at what the internet has done to. I don't know. You look at what it's done to the perspective of everything. It's just we lock in on things and we stick to them, and that's what we deal with. And that's why we're on a show twice a week trying to shape the narratives and turn that around. Right, Nate?
Yeah. First impressions are everything.
Let's not complain. Let's not complain about the internet. We love the internet. I love the internet.
I'm not complaining. I'm observing the internet. That's a very. I know it's hard to say.
When I was a kid.
But yeah. Anyway.
Okay, so let's get into today's show. And if you haven't noticed by the title or the thumbnail that you clicked on to watch this, or if you're listening on the podcast version, you saw the same things on that side. We're talking about the transfer portal because it opens tomorrow officially. So there's been a wave of names this weekend that have already been announced. I saw a Michigan player. Obviously, there is a Penn State player in the portal already. JB Nelson, we reported this at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com last week, that he's no longer on the Penn State football roster, officially goes into the portal or announces that decision on Monday. Here we are on the back half of that, and we haven't really had a chance to talk about it. We haven't had a chance to discuss the situation with JB Nelson since that happened on Friday. So I just want to open things up to you guys. If you want to talk about the process of how this happens, what you guys understand about the process, and then generally the impact of losing JB Nelson on a very deep and talented offensive line. Of course, I won't be able to shut up and give my opinion afterwards. So Fitz, I want to start with you. When it comes to JB Nelson, how do you view this situation with the first entrant into the portal for 2025 in the spring?
Couple different ways. First off, probably the least surprising member of the offensive line to jump in there. Going back to chat that we had in March, mentioned that this was a situation, and this is sort of a bubble situation more than anything. He was going to compete with Cooper Cousins for an open guard spot. It's the left guard spot. And you kind of feel if he didn't outright win that he would have an opportunity like Smith Vilbert before him, who I don't think was going to win a DN job, but was going to be part of the rotation, be part of the team's game plans, that he would have opportunities elsewhere, potentially lucrative opportunities elsewhere. There's not a lot of good offensive linemen out there. A lot of schools have holes, and this is a guy that's started, I think, 8 games back in 2023. So he's got starting experience. He played in all 16 last year. So there's experience there. So I think some team for a 1-year rental would be willing to pony up some money and take a chance on that. So I think it makes a ton of sense for JB Nelson to make that work. Now, he was going to play. He was going to play a decent amount. Cooper Cousins and him probably would have platooned. They probably would have spelled Venga Iwane on the other side as well, and given them some flexibility and some depth inside. This is an important move for depth, I think, because you look at what Penn State has or likes to do. They like to have 5 guys ready for the interior. They like to have 3 to 4 guys ready at tackle. And anytime you cut into that, it makes a difference. So he was going to play, despite what I think people are trying to spin this as he wasn't. He was going to play, but at the same time, you got to look at this and say Cooper Cousins has done a pretty good job in the spring to make this. Make it apparent. These guys realize what's going on. I mean, this is not a situation where he was blindsided by what was happening or anything like that, but these guys realize what's going on. They realize their competition. They realize that you look back a couple of years to Storm Duck. Storm Duck rated himself, I think, the 4th or 5th corner coming in for one spring, and then all of a sudden he, hopped a train to Louisville. So these guys understand what's going on. I think Nelson saw the writing on the wall. He wasn't going to be the starter, and that makes a ton of sense. But not a huge surprise from this era in college football standpoint.
Yeah. Nate, I'm always thinking about the next level. I was thinking about how do you get to the NFL? How do you get to make the paycheck? But that's also a decision you have to make right now in college football. And that is, I think, still settling in my brain. And I know for fans as well. So how do you view this situation, I guess, from the perspective of that, where it's not just the playing time. It's not just like, how do I get to the league? It's also, how do I maximize my value day to day? And is Penn State the best opportunity for a guy who's going to, as Fitz pointed out, platoon? We hadn't seen him line up with the starters in any of the portions of practice we've seen. Doesn't mean he wasn't. But
I did see him with the first team. I will say that.
Okay.
He has been taking legitimate first team reps, and he was there last Tuesday, 2 days before he was off the roster. So I will push back on that a little bit because he definitely was in there, and it wasn't a situation where he was a full-time second team guy.
Okay. Yeah. I had only seen where he was with the second team personally, but that's when they're on the other side of Haluba Hall. It's always difficult to keep your eye on that particular part. So I appreciate you correcting that. So Nate, that question to you.
Yeah. I think that this goes back to something that we thought the transfer portal would be in, right? This advent of transferring without limits, as well as compensation, that very specifically, including bonus year, right? The COVID part of the equation, that there would be this hidden, maybe not hidden, market of guys who are borderline NFL guys, but are great, experienced veteran pieces that are highly sought for college football programs, right? You can't get enough of those guys. And so there's this window of opportunity to, like, and I'm not saying that JB Nelson left for money. I don't know that, Fitz. I don't think that you can report that. I'm not saying that is the primary motivation, but the idea that you can, with a clean slate, pick it's almost like being drafted in the 7th round of the NFL draft versus being an undrafted free agent, and having your agent be able to pick out for you, right? Assuming that you have good offers, the place that best fits you and that best maximizes your opportunity, plus the compensation aspect. Like, if you can combine all of those things, it's really an ideal place to be for guys like that. And I don't think that, almost like Bo Prabula, it's a, from the program standpoint and college football standpoint, you can't blame guys for using the system in a way that the system has not corrected itself for.
Right. Which leads into the dramatic decision at Tennessee to move on from starting quarterback Nico Iamaleava, and that whole situation, which we can talk about in a second. It is part of the equation. It's part of the conversation when all these things happen. So I guess what is the situation of depth behind JB Nelson? Because Fitz, just looking at the roster, they have a lot of tackle depth. And this is something I think I was trying to say the other day when we were talking about the number of tackles they have and Javen Williams and his swing lineman potential. A lot of the depth on the interior is young. So you've got two guys. Cooper Cousins is a young player who is fighting for that first team spot. But then when Phil Troutwine talked about the left guard position, he mentioned a lot of guys and a lot of guys that didn't have a lot of experience. So the JB Nelson sized hole, how do you feel about Penn State's ability to replace that, the development of those young guys and the opportunity that it presents, but also having that unknown? How do you view the pluses and minuses there, and which side of the ledger do you come down on?
Yeah, that's a tough one because that's a large hole to fill, figuratively, literally, whatever you want to say. You've got a situation with a guy with a ton of experience, and you cannot replicate experience going into the season for a guy like Alex Birchmeier, for a guy like TJ Shanahan to a lesser extent, playing in the offense, to some of those other guys. So I'm thinking you're looking at a best 5 situation, which takes that tackle flexibility, takes that tackle depth, and really puts it to work here, because you've got Javen Williams, who I think we could agree, like, probably a more natural guard based on his background. He can slide in there. He was being labeled as a swing guy coming into the spring. Then you've got a good problem to have at right tackle with Anthony Donka and Nolan Rucci as 2 starters there, but also Donka's played some guard. Rucci, I think, has repped some guard in practice. So you're looking more of a best 5 situation than you're looking at this guy is the backup left guard, so he's going to get the backup left guard snaps. So I think you're kind of playing with the depth that you have. Typically, it's been flipped. Typically, Penn State has 2 or 3 tackles, and they are struggling to figure out how to make it work that way. I think this is probably a little bit easier, but at the same time, it's still something you have to get through, and that's why losing JB. And I get the reasons why you would take that opportunity elsewhere at this point in his career. And I mentioned in the chat, like, if he's going to try and be a pro prospect, which I think he does have pro potential, like that, if you're splitting snaps with a sophomore, if you're platooning, doing spot starts and things like that, there's going to be questions from the NFL why you weren't the full-time guy. So I think that makes total sense for him to go find some spot where he can start and play a full repertoire of games. So I think that makes a lot of sense for him. But on the back end, Penn State's got some holes to fill. I'm not sure that those backup guards that we have talked about are ready to jump into that role, because I think there's a gap there. You got guys with a lot of experience. You've got guys with a lot of talent at both levels, but you've got guys with a lot of experience, and you can't drill that in practice. So I think you're going to see some moving around. It's where a guy like Egan Boyer can be important to be a backup left tackle and make free Javen up to play a little bit of guard. And also, Phil Troutwine said Javen's going to play some right tackle. He's played right tackle in the spring and done a really good job. So this is a sort of a mix and match game for Phil Troutwine, rather than a next guy up on the interior is going to be a guy that we kind of shoehorn in there who might not be ready.
So the dynamic here is interesting for a couple of reasons. And Nate, I want to get back to you on some of the broader picture stuff, but from the mechanics of this, as Fitz just pointed out, Penn State has not had a depth of tackles where they could experiment by putting any of those guys at guard in the future. I wrote about this, and Fitz wrote about this last week after Phil Troutwine talked to the media, some of the opportunities they have to move those guys around, which, if you were building the depth chart in your mind and you said, generally, I think the consensus had been you're locking those 2 guys into right tackle because tackle's more important, and you want to make sure you have your best players there. But it is fascinating that even a guy like Nolan Rucci at 6'8", his pad level, his power in the run game opens him up to playing guard. And so there are a couple guys on this roster, I think, from an athletic ability, maybe don't fit at guard for that. Like, they're too tall, their pad level's a little too high, they might not have the power. Other than that, these guys are actually pretty flexible. Even guys like, theoretically, let's just say Garrett Sexton, 6'6". He's not big enough. He's not strong enough. But flexibility-wise, pad level-wise, in terms of could he accomplish playing guard? Yeah. That is really interesting that's more on the table now, because Nolan Rucci's in a similar situation where he also has 1 more year of eligibility, correct? So he's got to find a situation where he has those reps to prove to the NFL he's a guy that can play and somebody who has that talent. So it feels like there are more opportunities, more options than there were when you were kind of doing this exercise in your mind in the offseason, at least for me, in the last couple of weeks. So when it comes to the larger picture, which is, I do want to have that conversation with you guys here in a second, but the first thing I need to have is a more specific, narrow conversation about our favorite place to drink, which is Antifragile. Nate, have you gotten out to Antifragile recently? And What's the latest they've got on tap over there?
You know, it's been a minute, honestly. And here's the deal: it wouldn't matter if I was there yesterday. I still wouldn't know what's on tap because it rotates constantly, which is a great thing. You can go downtown to our favorite bar / brewery / they make cocktails, kombucha, you name it. It's Antifragile. And it's right downtown on East Calder Way. There's plenty of parking. Don't complain about parking. There's lots of lots around. There's street parking, you name it. You can always find a spot. And while you're there, hang out with some of the best people in State College. They're always serving up the best beer. They have cheesesteaks at Uncle John's, which had a minute where it was closed, but now it's back open and they're serving again. And thank God for that, because our allotment of cheesesteak consumption would be impacted dramatically in State College, Pennsylvania, were it not for that location. So
it's funny. I talked to some friends who not only enjoyed other cheesesteaks before John's opened, but also were involved with other businesses that opened cheesesteaks, and they're telling me privately, like, yeah, John's is better. Which Fitz, you've been talking about the cheesesteaks there, but I'm so jealous of you guys and your ability to have beer. But they also have the hard kombucha, which I think is awesome. That was something when I first had kombucha like 10 years ago. I was like, dude, this would be great as like a hard seltzer type drink. It's one of my favorite things to go downtown and get at Antifragile.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. If you're not a straight beer guy, there's also mixed drinks. There's also the kombucha. I have tried it. It's very good. It's not my thing, but it's very good. Like I can, if I see a really good Pilsner on tap, I'm going to go with that. So Nate is funny because he talks about the beer list, and like every time we're in there, he's like, yeah, grab me a hazy. Which one? Yeah, well, whatever, just there's a couple on tap. There's a couple options for him. So
yeah,
T Frank, I got great news for you with Antifragile. Yeah. I know you don't have enough jobs and you're not busy enough, but they are hiring for the summer. So if you're interested in bartending, you can.
I've got weekends.
cheers@antifragilebrew.com, and you can sling some beers and watch people have a great time, and talk up the beer, talk up the cheesesteaks, and talk up the site while you're there. So they are looking for bartenders this summer. So if anybody is interested, cheers at antifragilebrew.com.
If it wasn't for my short-term memory, it'd be the perfect job where I could do both. I could promote the site, talk to people about football, give them a beer, have a great time. I'll just give everyone the wrong beer because I would not be able to remember what they were asking for and the individual person. Something coming up on the show. I do want to mention this before we get back into the conversation. We aren't doing a mailbag today. There's too many things to talk about. We're already 20 minutes into the show, and we haven't even gotten through the first segment of the show. I know, Nate. I know. But here's the thing: is like sometimes when you have to pick something up and move it around, when you have to do something different, it takes a little bit of logistics. And I've been thinking about something, and I've wanted to do something for our podcast listeners to help get them more involved and to thank them for being as consistent and loyal as they are. So here's what we're going to do. For the mailbag, for the foreseeable future, if you have an Apple Podcast account, leave a review, leave a 5-star review, preferably, and a question for the mailbag. And I'll be pulling from there for our questions. So that's going to be, if we get enough for tomorrow, we'll do that. I know that podcast people, the rhythm is not to go all the way down, scroll all the way down, and then click on the thing and give a 5-star review and all those things. But I just want to give you guys the opportunity to be involved in the show. And the mailbag is the easiest way to get you involved, specifically because you're not here live when the show airs on YouTube. So again, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Leave a question for the mailbag, and we'll get the best of those that we can answer here on the show. We'll have it open for tomorrow, and then, of course, next week we'll have it open for the mailbag heading into the blue-white game, which, of course, should have a lot of really good conversation and questions for there as well. So I just wanted to give everybody that heads up about what we're trying to do, changing here on the show. Appreciate it. I know nobody is interested in those things from the football perspective, but as a business here on the show, we do have to make some of those announcements. Okay, let's talk about the transfer portal now, because that's where we started this conversation. And Nate, Ross Dellinger wrote about the transfer portal situation with the House settlement looming and the potential changes to the roster and limits to what you can pay athletes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to get into
Yep.
all those details. What I do want to ask you is, what did you take away from that? And do you think that this is going to be as crazy of a portal window where a guy like JB Nelson, a career guy in the mix, but never a starter for full time for a full season, could command, six figures, large numbers of money in the transfer portal on a non-proven product from like the hard numbers perspective? How do you see all this playing out when it starts tomorrow?
I don't know the specifics on numbers. I think that there's always a balance to this, right? And when you see reporting that talks about a $50 million roster in college football, one, I think Ohio State already had one last year. But also, that's fine to talk about the extreme end. Yes, there are going to be some programs that have cash to burn and want to burn it and are happy to do so, right? With specifically super wealthy investors, right? Owners who are willing to bankroll that and
So-
to put it all
That
out
is
there.
an interesting. Can I just jump in here? Because you said they have cash to burn.
Yeah.
Most programs don't have cash to burn, though, right? Like it feels like there are two very different conversations here of, we need to be tight with our resources because this is an unsustainable model if we have to do all the things we need to do in terms of NIL and multiple sports, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you're talking about, on the other end, people that have just money available to toss around.
I'm talking about individuals, humans, right? Not necessarily the institution. You can see them as one and the same, but they're not. So yes, I do. But I guess my point is, I'm not sure that that's a realistic perspective on the broader picture, right? It's gonna be the exception rather than the rule. However, at Penn State, that's significant nonetheless, because if you have somebody splashing the pot, it muddies the water. It challenges your ability to keep up and compete in terms of compensation with players that you want to retain on the roster. And so I think that this window is going to be super fascinating for a couple of reasons. One, you're going to have that on the high end. You are going to have some marquee departures, right? Guys who leave programs. I'm not saying Penn State. There's no buzz on that. I'm just saying, as a concept, guys who want to take advantage of your value as a player is different as a returning player. It doesn't matter what program you're in. It's different whether you're a returning player or a transfer portal pickup, right? And so your value, usually for guys who have proven that they have a market, is going to be higher in the transfer portal. And so guys who are motivated by that and by that alone, or more, or weighted towards that, yeah, they're going to have to take a look. They're going to be interested in that. The second piece of it that I think is, again, super fascinating is, even last night there were, I'm not a legal guy, right? But stuff happened in the House NCAA settlement, right? Filings and that kind of stuff, even as of last night. But within it, there are no changes being made. Now, there are no changes being made to roster cap sizes, which is a core tenet to what the NCAA wants out of this settlement. They're not budging on that. And so if you have most schools carrying 125 players that have to now, yes, there is a 40 player gap between walk-ons and scholarship players. The 85 scholarship limit previously will now become 105 fully funded scholarships that schools can use, but you can't have walk-ons. So what happens to that side of the transfer portal, right? It's almost like there's a high and a low market that's going to displace and have ramifications all over the landscape. So I do think that there will be, really not by choice, a bunch of entries into the portal for guys who just can't stay in the current program that they're in because
Right.
they're not going to be able to carry that many players, as well as guys who are looking to cash in and to maximize their value for, whatever this opportunity is before the clearinghouse gets involved, which is a second component to this, or third, fourth, whatever, who has to make sure that your value is legitimate, right? Or portends to be. So yeah, it's there's a lot involved in this, but the end takeaway is, it's going to be a heavy portal season, I think. So
with all of that upheaval, Penn State, their plan typically is to keep everybody in the boat, make sure that the team that you've assembled stays assembled. And the situation at Tennessee that has kind of underscored the mercantile view of college football, the professionalism of the sport, where these are not collectively bargained contracts. There's no framework for these things. So essentially, everybody's on a 1-year deal. Nico Iamaleava transfers from Tennessee. This is not the first contract holdout that we've seen, right, Nate?
Yeah, I don't even know that holdout is the right. I'm not sure how to describe it. It's a negotiating tactic that he employed, and obviously on the advice of people around him, right? His dad, I guess, is involved, and that tactic was to skip practice, to bail, right? To not. So frustrated by where the contract negotiations were, didn't feel like they were making progress. And so, I think it's going to be interesting to see what kind of revisionist history happens here. But I don't think he necessarily wanted to leave Tennessee. Mm-hmm. He just wanted to get what he wanted out of right. He wanted to get what he perceived to be his value. Right. And so you see other guys, you see Carson Beck make $4 million or $3.5 million, whatever that number is, and you're making $2 million. And is Carson Beck that good? I try not to be that guy that speaks ill of other players, but this speaks to the NFL-ification of the sport, where the next quarterback has the highest deal, regardless of ability or you just stack deal on top of deal, which leads, again, the difference is there's a cap in the NFL. There is the ability to say we are within this margin, and within that margin we still have to field a team, but we'll give you a certain percentage of the cap, we'll give you certain things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's absolutely no cap to this, which is both good and bad. Good from the entrepreneurial sense of you get your value of what you are as an American citizen and all of those things that are ideals outside of sports. But when it comes to the actual tactical deployment of resources to field a team, this is a nightmare, because Tennessee doesn't have a starting quarterback that it went to the playoff with last year for no other reason than the contract, which is not something that this level has been set up for, really. So I guess, Fitz, we haven't heard from you too much here. I just want to get final thoughts before we move on to some of the other things we want to talk about on the show today.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look, I don't want to say this is a special situation. I know Nate wrote a column about it where it outlines that it's not a special situation, but this recruitment, this whole career has been different than most other quarterbacks, than most other prospects, because this is one you knew about beforehand. Like the $8 million was not a secret when he signed with Tennessee. So this was not something that really caught anybody by surprise. It's just a matter of catching your hand in the cookie jar, asking for too much, and then it gets public. And then once it gets public, there's no winning that. I mean, there's no coming back for either side. Right. There. So I just think it's very interesting, and going from and escalating the way that it did, where he's at practice and then, a report comes out from Pete Nakos at On3. Some people have called him different names this week, but he ended up being right. But then all of a sudden he's not at practice, and this thing completely shreds apart. So it's been entertaining from this end, but it's not, I don't think that's the way that you see this go down a lot. So, it certainly happens. It's happened here, but I don't think it's the general line of behavior that you're going to look for. So I'm interested to see which way it goes, because you look at the potential landing spots for him. And what was it? Yesterday was North Carolina, UCLA, and Tulane. Carolina's all of a sudden going to get the South Alabama guy. So like it's a very, very diluted market, I think. So it's really interesting to watch. And I'm glad I'm watching it from afar. I'm glad I'm not covering it.
Kyle K says Syracuse all ACC wide receiver Trevor Pena currently expected in the transfer portal. We talked about that here in the chat a little bit earlier. Wanted to have this part of the conversation just wrap these things up. Quickly off the top, what we see from him just as a quick search. Like, this is absolutely nothing just other than reading some advanced stats. 6 foot 184. He's a 60 receiver, 2020 receiver who did not play meaningful plays until 2024, where he had 84 receptions for 932 yards and 9 touchdowns. Good numbers, but to be clear, Syracuse had the most pass-happy offense in college football. So a lot of those numbers are inflated by opportunity in the offense, not necessarily the number 1, number 2, number 3. I don't know about that. I just know that those things are part of the conversation. His yards per route run, 1.76. Not an impressive number. So again, volume, accumulation, not necessarily efficiency within that particular offense. First read. Fitz, you got something there?
Yeah, I'm watching the chat, and this goes in Syracuse. Trevor Pena, who's from Ocean Township in South Jersey, I believe, expect to enter the transfer portal. And the next thing is on all caps, need. Like, that's not the thought process here. You got to scout. You got to figure out if that's a fit. He's 6 foot 185. Something Penn State doesn't have. I know that.
No.
But no, I mean, you can't just jump to there's a receiver in the portal, so you need him. So you need to throw money in him. Penn State's not thinking that way. And I would caution people just to think about that for a second. It's more than stats. It's more than how these things work. Because, a couple of weeks ago, I put up something on the site where it was tracking all the guys that Penn State was monitoring last year in the portal. A lot of those guys had really good stats. And then all of a sudden they went to a new school, didn't work out. So It's all about the scouting. It's all about the making it work in the best system possible. 6 foot 185. Could it work? Yeah, absolutely could work. Is that probably the blueprint of what they're looking for in the spring? I'm not necessarily sure. I think you could use another bigger guy. I think Tyron Hudson is an X type, but a smaller X type. So
yeah,
you could work around that and make some things work. So I have no doubt that they're going to give the tape a look, and they probably already given the tape a look if he's in there. So just I don't think they're just going to jump at everything just to get something. I don't think that, number one, I don't think that's the way they operate to begin with. Number two, it's not the right way to operate, because then you end up with guys that you don't know that are going to fit. So I'm curious to see how this one works out.
Two things. Can I do 2 things?
Sure.
I'd like a third.
I'm only going to give you 2. The first is, if Penn State threw the ball that much, there are players currently on the roster who could put up the same numbers.
Right.
That which ties to the second point, which is, it would take Jeremiah Smith to change the identity of Penn State's offense next season.
Can I just give the context of what you're saying? Kyle McCord had 640 dropbacks last year. The next closest is Shadur Sanders, who's nearly 100 dropbacks behind him. They threw the ball so much at Syracuse. Okay, continue.
I guess it just, even thinking about the current dynamic of Penn State, and you're looking at this roster, and you're still talking about receivers, and we are as guilty of it as anybody. And it's not even a guilt thing. It's real, right? There is still a need there to improve the roster at receiver. Yes. However, there should not be any mystery to what this team is going to be offensively next season. They're going to run the football with their 2 workhorse running backs. They're going to pass the football to those 2 guys, right? Those guys are going to touch the ball all the time. Does it mean that there's no responsibility, that there are no receptions to be had among the receivers and the tight ends? No, of course not. They're right. You have to have some level of balance, but I just think that we collectively end up talking ourselves in circles over, like, Penn State will not transform into a pass-heavy team. It does not matter who who they get in the transfer portal. If they get somebody in the transfer portal, they could get a really good player in the transfer portal. It's not it will change fractionally the identity of this team. They are solid in what they do. They know what they want to do. They are built to run the football. So I think that is what you're going to continue to see next season, regardless, right? Even with the current personnel that they have to catch the football.
Okay, let's take a break from the portal and all of these things and talk about the way that Penn State would prefer to add players to their roster, and that is through recruiting, which means we need to get into Fitz's recruiting update. Another good weekend for Penn State football on the recruiting trail with a pretty important commitment, because any quarterback is an important commitment. So let's start there. Fitz here on Fitz's recruiting update. Peyton Falzone, 4-star quarterback from Pennsylvania, commits to the Nittany Lions. Just overall, your thoughts on this player and his meaning for the team.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big one because, number one, I think the intrigue of all of it, really, you look at quarterback recruiting, in-state recruiting, athlete recruiting, just everything that you look at from this one is very intriguing because you see the rankings there. If you're watching on YouTube, the industry has him 206 overall, number 11 athlete, number 5 in Pennsylvania. On3 has him 290 overall, number 13 athlete, number 4 in Pennsylvania. He's coming to play quarterback. And this is something we've talked about on the show a bunch. Are we convinced that he's a quarterback in the long run? Saying it's still up in the air, but he's going to have the opportunity to do so. And I think that was a big part of securing this commitment because he wants to play quarterback. He is a guy that is, I don't want to say new to the position, but he's not a naturally, he was not playing peewee quarterback and a quarterback all the way up through it, which is encouraging for his development. You look at what he does on the field, and he is, as I put it on the board, he is a moose wearing pads. He is a 6'4.5", 6'5", 205-pound, playing in the Lehigh Valley, so he looks much bigger than everybody else. That is a runaway train at times. He is making some improvements on his throwing motion. T-Frank, you and I have a conversation right now.
Yep.
That's kind of the off to the side where everybody's going to focus on his delivery and his mechanics and all that stuff, period. I think it's a bit of a red herring. I think that if you look at what he's doing as a developmental prospect, you don't have to have the best mechanics. You don't have to have the best, all that kind of stuff. What I want to see is the processing. What I want to see is the things that you need as a quarterback to recognize what's going on before the snap and recognize how that's going to impact the next 6 seconds.
Good. If
What's
you're
that?
watching it, so this is a highlight here. If you're watching what happens on some of these highlights, it's not necessarily great process. He's chucking the ball deep. He's hitting some of these plays. Now, this is a beautiful throw, right, but the process, the play after the snap, I'm going to break the offensive game plan and go freelance. If you see that too often, that tells you something about the processing during the play.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had this conversation. I know you're a big Josh Allen guy, and every 6'5", 200 and some pound quarterback is going to be compared to Josh Allen. But you look at what he did at Wyoming.
Yep.
And you saw some of the same things. You saw some of the I don't want to say carelessness with the ball, but you saw some of the issues that could plague him pop up throughout his career, his college career. And then he fixed it, which is good. So it's going to be on him to fix not only his throwing motion, his mechanics, and all that stuff, but also just gaining a general feel for the position. And if he can do that, the ceiling is sky high. I mean, I'm not going to lie here. This guy is a super athlete. Like, this is, he ran a hand time 10.68 in the 100. He ran a 4.5 at Penn State last year. I'm going to go with the 4.5 instead of 10.68. I'm really interested to see how that FAT time shakes out in districts, states, whatever it may be on the 100 meter dash. But to be at that speed, to be at that level, at that size, is moving, absolutely moving. So I'm encouraged to see what's going to happen from that. Penn State, you look at what they have in Troy Hune, you look at what they have in Peyton Falzone, 2 very, very different guys, and 2 guys with a lot to improve upon, which that's kind of what you expect with high school quarterbacks. So it's so intriguing to look at this, and there's not much else you can say other than that if he reaches his ceiling, that's a different kind of quarterback than we've seen here. You know, he's Drew's size, but he's also a better athlete and a better runner and all that
I
stuff.
compared him a bit to, in terms of potential, Justin Fields level potential in terms of having the arm and the athleticism. Well, I mean, I was trying to think of the guys
we pick the
who,
best guys, and then it doesn't happen all the time, and then
Sure.
we look stupid. And so, but no, I mean, you look. So this was a comparison on the board to what Bo was able to do, and it was very interesting to look at the numbers, the testing numbers, and things like that. So he's faster than Bo. Bo was a better runner, like a better vision runner, a better guy that can find those holes. He's got a much stronger arm than Bo. Bo was a better passer, like finding the layers and doing all that kind of stuff. So I'm very like that's a bad comparison, not yours, mine, as a bad comparison in terms of an athlete growing into a quarterback. So I'm very it's going to be fun to watch. And of course, we've said before, like if that doesn't work out, he's got 11-inch hands, he's got size, he's got speed, he's got all the testing numbers that align with the guys Penn State has brought in as tight ends. So I think he'd be a hell of a tight end. So yeah. I'm very up in the air on how this one's going to turn out, but I can't wait to watch it. So I'm very, very excited. With the portal era being what it is, taking two quarterbacks is a smart thing. Taking two quarterbacks, the math works out for that. And Penn State's been overly committed to Troy Hume for a long, long time. But you look at how this stacks up when Drew leaves, Gruckmeyer, Smollett going to go at it, and one of them isn't there. Like, I think the writing is on the wall there, and then you go from whomever that may be to Beckham Kritza and Troy Hume and now Peyton Falzone. So they certainly needed bodies in that room, certainly needed to stack that up. So I think that the math makes a ton of sense. They have looked at taking two quarterbacks in several classes now, and this is the one that makes a lot of sense.
It's something, again, as you just pointed to there, this is not new for Penn State. I mean, Bo Perbula, Drew Aller were both in the same class. Michael Johnson Jr., Taquan Roberson, on and on and on, back and forth. I know, but I know. Not all of them are like the best polls, but they have gone with this approach of, and I think this is smart, because the things that make a quarterback great, as you just mentioned, in terms of the processing, the ability, I mean, we've seen every shape and form of quarterback come through this program, and you don't know what's going to result in the special mix. It's a between the ears position, kind of like specialists, quarterback, kicker, punter, those kind of things. There's obviously the physical component to it, but the more you get through and the more high opportunity, high potential players that you bring through, the better your odds of one of them hitting, on the highest end. So I think it's going to be an interesting thing to watch these two in this class develop and compete as they go, because I do think that they are closer in terms of their ability and their potential on the high end than Aller and Perbula were, or any of the other quarterbacks we've put together in those two quarterback mixes. Now, not to say that both Drew and Bo couldn't be starters, but the high end of Drew, that is the difference between him and Bo Perbula on the football field and the determinations between the two of them. Anyway.
I'm not ready to jump there. Also, Michael Johnson Jr. went to the portal again yesterday. So,
okay.
That one's been bouncing around for a while. I think he went to FAU and then Q's, and then we will see where he ends up next. So the saga is not over.
So you had a chance, I believe, to talk to Jake Krull, who was here this weekend. Dorian Barney also was here this weekend. So just generally give us some of the idea about what the feedback was and how the latest round of visits on campus went, just highlighting those two guys.
Yeah, very quickly. Jake Krull was on campus at the beginning of last week. He went to Oklahoma over the weekend for their spring game Crimson Combine. I don't even know what they're calling it, but their modified spring celebration there. So he was there, but he's been a ton of places over the last couple of weeks. Went to Ohio State, Michigan in March, Florida State, Florida is in it. He's got a top 12. Penn State's in it and has gotten 2 visits from him, but he's been all over the place. I mean, this is a well-traveled recruit in the class of 2026. He's also a darn good recruit in the class of 2026. So he's looking at Penn State mainly because of their tradition of putting pass rushers in the league that are roughly his size and, his measurables and his sort of game style. He's 6'2.5". He's not the biggest guy in the world, not the absolute longest guy in the world, but he's a trucker, man. He gets in there and he makes plays. So he's been one of Deion Barnes' top guys for a long, long time. He did make it to campus in February. for the February 1st junior day, and then all of a sudden made it back this weekend. So what his plan is he's got these 12 schools. He's visited, I think, 9 of them this calendar year. And then he's going to break it down in May and set up his official visits. He's not ready to name official visits. One of the few prospects in 2026 not ready to name official visits. So that's the next step if you're Penn State. Get on that calendar, see if you can get there. I think we labeled it on the board as a puncher's chance. I think that's where Penn State stands right now because there's a lot of good schools. And he is an IMG kid, but he's also an Orlando kid. So he's a Florida kid. So some of those guys that will come from all over the country to play at IMG, and then they might look home or they might look closer to home at least. He's a Florida kid, so it doesn't change much in the math of how far away from home he'll have to go if he does go to Penn State, but he is a high priority on the board. You look at that edge board with Carter Meadows and Jackson Samuels Ford visited last week, and they just got a ton of guys that they can look to and look to try and close. I'm not going to say pick from because that is the wrong way to put it. But I think there's a lot of options out there. Penn State's going to, get a good defensive end class. I feel pretty confident about that. Luke Wafel, I don't know why I didn't mention Luke Wafel in the first place, but they've got some options out there. Krul is certainly still on the board. I would take the field over Penn State right now. I'd be surprised if he did end up here, but it would be a very pleasant surprise. They'd be very happy with that. And if you look at his comments in my story, he definitely is looking at more than just location, more than just some of the regular things. He's really intrigued by Penn State's assembly line of defensive ends.
So Dorian Barney, an interesting name that has cropped up more and more frequently. Anything just quickly you wanted to share there? And of course, Maxwell Hiller, Joey O'Brien, Jackson Ford. These are guys that Ryan and Fitz have connected with and got feedback from over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Haven't mentioned this yet so far. Please subscribe to the Blue White Illustrated here on the YouTube channel. But of course, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com is a place you go to get all the recruiting intel. You can join for just $1 for the first week. And then, of course, after that, you can decide if you want to join us for a year or not. Quick sidebar, if you subscribe here to the YouTube channel, that will automatically enroll you. We're picking 5 winners, Blue White Weekend, to get a yearly subscription to the site just for subscribing and supporting us here on the YouTube channel. Like the video, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Fitz, any last thoughts here about visits and players from this past week?
Dorian Barney was a guy that I put on my February big board. I put it at the end because he's from Georgia. He was once committed to Alabama, and now he's back on the market. I think Texas A&M is pretty strong here, but put him on there. He is a native of Erie, Pennsylvania. So obviously he's in Georgia now. So, but there are connections back to Pennsylvania. So I think that matters. I think he's been one of Terry Smith's top guys, along with Kari Adams there at corner. And Penn State is making some headway. He's got an official visit set up for next month. So be interesting to see how much ground they can make up with Barney. It's an interesting recruitment. Reminds me a lot of Elliot Washington's recruitment, to be honest with you. Committed to Bama. He stepped back and all of a sudden, had some different kind of options all over the country. I think he's mentioned Georgia and Alabama and stuff like that, but I think it's more Texas A&M, Penn State. You've got different schools in different areas, and usually what that means is the Georgia and Alabama probably not coming as hard as he thought they would, or they were at one point. So I think there's a window there for Penn State to work its way in. And Terry Smith's pretty darn good recruiter if you haven't been following along. So I'm curious to see how that official visit comes to play. But Penn State has got some connections there. They've leaned on those connections. They got him to campus finally. And this is a guy that we thought may commit to Texas A&M a couple of weeks ago, but seems to have slowed it down and is going to take official visits now. One more thing before we get out of the recruiting update. T. Frank, thank you for doing the Peyton Falzone video on Sunday. I got back to you too late. Busy time of year this year with, I sound like Ryan, but baseball is taking over. And so we're busy all the time now. So appreciate you getting that out there. And I'm glad we could get some thoughts together on this Tuesday show.
That'll do it for Fitz's recruiting update. Once again, like the video, always helps us out, and subscribe to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com for more of that information. Let's get into the spring practice second half preview because we are already well into the second half of spring football, but this is the part where we're going to take a look ahead. Practice is tonight, so we're going to start with what we're looking for at practice tonight and then kind of preview the important to-do list, checklist stuff for the Nittany Lions as they get into the final half of spring football. As I was reminded to start the show, not the last time they can get better, but the last time they can have an organized event with the entire team together that concentrated the juice before you stir it up, the orange juice before you get it out of the can and stir it up with the water. So, Nate, welcome back to the show.
Hello.
Second half preview. Let's start with tonight. What are you interested in learning? What are you looking for? Where your eye is going to go at practice when we get our final open preview before the blue-white game next weekend?
You go first. What are you and Fitz? I mean, I'm going to look at the offense because I typically look at the offense. It's much easier for me to digest. You're
going to hobnob and talk to people and eventually get some good information, but also leave the observing up to us. Yes, that's what you're going to do. I'll jump in here. I'm looking at the offensive line. You have an opportunity there with JB Nelson gone. And I know I said earlier about the shuffling with the tackles and Javen Williams and all that stuff, but those tackles are not playing right now. Javen is playing tackle right now. So you've got an opportunity, if you're one of those young guards, to step up and get some meaningful reps that could potentially vault you into the conversation come August. So I think that looking to see who is behind Cooper Cousins, looking to see how they move those things around and try and make that work, I think is a big deal. And it's going to help somebody in their case for getting on the field in August and September.
So, Nate, I just wanted to hear your voice again, honestly.
That's
12 minutes without Nate was too long, so it's like you to go first so you can say some stuff. I spent, like you, Nate, I've spent a lot of time with the offense, and the problem is once you've started on one side, you kind of get the rhythm so you can pick up the differences, and then that becomes the observations I've made. But I'm desperate to learn more about this defense, and that to me, that's the difficult thing is there's less. From a defensive perspective, there's less opportunity to see what the plan is because they're not running plays. They're just kind of working through some concepts and some ideas. But are they playing field and boundary at corner? To me, that would be a change in how they've done things. They did it last year to get the Igbinosin kid in a lot of match situations where he's playing man coverage on the short side of the field. That X receiver matchup that Fitz and I are always talking about of X receivers versus other receivers. All those little details, I want to learn more about them. It's just there's less information just generally on that side of the ball that I can glean normally. But then on the other side, for the last 3 years, basically since Drew Aller took over, the only thing I've been allowed to do is put my camera on the receivers and the quarterbacks because that's what everybody wants to know. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm trying to get a little more defensive information from this this final preview before we get into the defense and offense, playing in front of all of us, running plays, running coverages during the blue-white game. So you still got nothing?
Look,
I didn't know if you were stalling. I'm sorry. I didn't know if you were stalling. That's all.
I've talked to some people, and there's optimism about Penn State defensively. In terms of identity, just the way that Jim Knowles kind of operates, and it's different, right? Mm-hmm. How do I put this? I think that Manny Diaz to Tom Allen was different, and Tom Allen to Jim Knowles is different, and that Jim Knowles and Manny are maybe a little bit closer. I'm not going into that. That's your lane.
Sure,
you handle
I have
that.
Thoughts.
But in terms of maybe aggressiveness. Right, just the style, and the
efficiency
again,
is the word that comes to mind.
The identity they want to put on the field, I think, is maybe a little bit back into that category, right? And I think that everybody understood a little bit that Tom Allen was a different. He was going to be different from Manny, right? But Manny was beloved. I think on the backside of this, that's what you take away is Manny was really, really, really loved. And that's not to say that Tom Allen wasn't, but there's a really strong affinity already for Jim Knowles.
Gotcha. So let's talk about the second half. Let's get into kind of the bigger picture previews. What does the team need to accomplish between now and the blue-white game, Fitz? What are the things that you think are important for them to have a strong spring game to finish this portion of the calendar in a strong way?
I don't even know that's going to show up at the blue-white game, but installation is huge. So on the defensive side of the ball, you look at the guys that they have back. who need reps, who need a ton of experience because you're losing a ton of experience to the draft. So I think that's the biggest thing is mental. And I don't know if you're going to see that pop up on next Saturday. It's two Saturdays from now. Sorry. So you've got an opportunity to make that and then just keep the competition level high. I think it's probably overgeneralization to say, what do they need to accomplish? Do they need to have starting receivers in place? Do they need to have an offensive line rotation set? No, they don't. So I don't see that as a huge problem. I think they'll be just getting to the finish line kind of connotates like just like scraping your way through there, but like
right.
Finish your installations, finish your competitions, and keep everything up, and stay healthy, really. So I just think that's and I'm not saying this to you, T. Frank, but a potentially overrated question because there's a lot to accomplish, but it's not necessarily getting the game plan in to play against Ohio State, Oregon, whatever it may be.
Nate, any thoughts?
How dare you ask that question? No, it's one step at a time, right? 1% better every day. All of the cliches that you could possibly have. Look, I do think that the reality is the roster today is going to be different from the roster on May 1st. So continuing to sort those things out, continuing to figure out who you want to prioritize to think that they are continuing to compete for a starting job, right? Like all of those things are very important. This is to me, spring practice, and like I'm fully in general manager mode here, but this is player acquisition, retention, and management. Like that is what all of this is right now. Is how do you balance your practices and the way things are, the trajectory that these guys are on, to maintain investment from the guys who you really want to keep in the program and, not get poached. Like, how do you balance all of those things? It's difficult. It's difficult. Yeah. And not to mention the fact that even when you're talking about the defense, man, look at those linebackers. They're not like, they got linebackers not playing. Tony Rojas isn't playing.
Yeah.
He's going to start. He's going to play a ton of snaps next year. You got guys, you got both tackles on the offensive line that aren't practicing this spring. So there's a ton of difference, right? I just, individual development. Yes, you got the install on defense, and yes, you want to continue to get better and figure out who you're going to be offensively. I think we know what the answer to that is, whether James Franklin says it or not. They're going to be a run heavy team. But to me, the next week, 2 weeks is literally all about sorting out your roster and who the team is going to be that you have going into August.
I can add something to that, because you're looking at, in this world where you might have to cut to 105, you've got 20 guys playing for a roster spot, essentially, maybe more, because there's still some other guys to show up this summer. They could go into the portal and still add some numbers there. So there are going to be guys who will keep an eye out for at practice tonight, because the window opens tomorrow. It might work, might not. But the window closes before spring ball is over. So I'm fascinated to see how that's going to work. If you need to, for lack of a better word, cut 20 guys, like, there's no portal window on the other end of that. And a lot of those guys are going to be walk-ons. A lot of those guys are going to be underclassmen walk-ons who cannot enter the portal at any time. So I'm very curious to see what the NCAA decides to do with that, because you got to find, if you're going to go find a home, like, you have to be in the portal to do so, to communicate with other coaches. So those guys are striving for position, not just position battles, but roster spots. Really, we keep showing the receivers one-on-ones from a couple of weeks ago. And Aaron Enterline is a walk-on wide receiver from Pennsylvania, and he's good. Like, he's a good player.
He's a good, talented player.
Is he a guy that's going to break into the rotation right now? Is Ethan Black a guy that's going to be breaking the rotation right now? Probably not. But at the same time, the athletic upside and the skill and the work that they've put in has warranted a roster spot for those guys, but has it warranted a roster spot with 105 at the 105 number? I don't know. So that to me is the most fascinating thing. And it's going to take place with a bunch of players that you're going to see go into the portal, and everybody that doesn't follow close is going to be like, I don't know that name. Like, I've never heard of this
big
guy.
Old shrug.
We like to do the I've never heard of this guy game. I don't particularly care for it, but anyway, that's a side conversation. I'm complaining about the internet again, Nate. Sorry. It's going to be fascinating to see. Like, if I'm Penn State and I'm trying to, keep my relationships up and trying to keep my promises to these guys up, do you let them go into the portal, the non-scholarship guys, and keep them on the roster, which is not the protocol for a guy that would be, like JB Nelson, so I'm very excited to see how this works out, because really that's doing right by them, and it's doing right by the program. And it's one of those things where they sat them down, and we had some stories about this earlier in the winter, or late in the winter. They sat them down and say, we can't promise anything because we don't know what's going to happen. So it's going to be fascinating to see how that part of the roster equation plays out.
Is that your biggest that sounds like your biggest X factor of how these things play out and what we might see, how that then relates to what we see at the blue-white game. Nate, do you have an X factor in this final 2 weeks that might change something of your perception about this? Because I think the injuries and the guys not participating, as much as they are not long-term season-ending things, I think that's relevant. I wrote about best and worst case scenarios or best and worst case news that we've heard so far. And one of the biggest things I mentioned was Nolan Rucci is not developing right now, from the full bore sense of coming out of the winter, having gotten bigger and stronger, and then applying all of those things that he learned last year and refining all those things. If he's injured, even if it's not the full go participant, how much is he developing? It's just an open question of, I don't know. And he's a guy that we talk about when we talk about this depth, talk about this offensive line and the embarrassment of riches. We talk about them having 2 starting right tackles, but neither of those guys have played a full season against the best competition and performed at their highest the entire time. So I'm not trying to take a strength and pretend it's a weakness, but there are areas where the projection is these guys getting better. They're not doing that. Tony Rojas is not out there, and I think he's going to be one of the most critical pieces in the front seven if they don't get a consistent 4-man pass rush. So what's an X factor to you?
They had it the same thing with Drew Shelton last year, and right. I mean, that was a similar situation. They're not dead. They're still in meetings. They're still taking mental reps. They're still at practice, right? They're going through. I totally understand your point, and I hear you. But I do think that there is still opportunity for development to a certain extent, especially for guys who, have years under their belt and know how to handle themselves maturely in the event of a situation like this. So you expect older guys to be more engaged. And again, I mean, this is, yes, Rucci is older, but he's also relatively new to the program. So there is newness in terms of what he's learning from Phil Troutwine and all of those things. So no, but I don't know what X factor means, if that's a player, but to me, it's literally who do they get and who do they lose? Because if you recall last year, and I do think that this is interesting, and I honestly, I don't know the inner workings of how it played out this way, but nearly all of Penn State's transfer portal entries last year were on the last day.
The last day, yes. When I went to Camden Yards for a Yankees-Orioles game, it was really convenient. So, yeah.
So,
but we were ahead of it, so it helped. Yeah.
But how they handle that is again going to be.
It was also after the blue-white game. So well after the blue-white game.
So we'll see how all that plays out. Of course, again, practice coming up tonight. James Franklin's practice press conference will be 7:45, 8 o'clock here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Make sure you check us out then. I'll be sitting on the turf at Haluba Hall, putting it up on the internet for you. And then if you have a subscription here to the YouTube channel and you enable notifications, you'll get it immediately from my laptop to your phone. All that coming up tonight. Of course, at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, we got practice notes, observations. We got our real-time observations on the message board. All that stuff. Very big day for Penn State football. We'll talk to you about it later. And then coming up tomorrow, BWI Live, 10 a.m. Talk to you then.